You know what they say, time heals all wounds, and it also causes ancient technologies to disappear. Greek fire is essentially the primitive form of napalm, and it was first created in Greece. It was used often and efficiently for naval battles during the Byzantine Empire. It was used and worked well for these battles because it was able to not only float on top of the water, but it also was difficult to put out the fire using water as well. The secrets regarding this substance were guarded so greatly as it was such a powerful weapon at the time. The information on what it was made out of, how it was stored, or how it functioned remains a mystery to this day. The formula to recreate it has been tried many times, but it is currently thought that the particular storage and some sort of pressurized delivery system are what played such a huge role in its functionality and ignition, and we have yet to figure out those secrets. In our number 9 spot today we have flexible glass. This is something that is actually sometimes debated on whether or not it actually existed at all, but there is some evidence and anecdotes that would suggest it absolutely did at one point. The stories surrounding this lost creation depict a glassmaker who presents a glass vessel which holds various different things depending on where the story came from and who's telling it. The glass vessel was presented to the emperor, who inspected it before returning it to the glassmaker, who then threw it on the ground. The glassmaker then picks it up off of the ground and goes on to show the emperor that rather than broken pieces, the glass vessel just has a small dent in it, which he then proceeds to hammer back to the original shape, and thus the vessel now appears as if it had never taken any damage at all. It is said from here that rather than the emperor being excited about this new and useful creation, he began to worry that it would devalue things like the silver and gold already in circulation. This is said to have led to him ensuring that no one else knew the formula to create the flexible glass, and then subsequently beheading the poor glassmaker. This is what has ensured that if it ever were real, the flexible glass was a secret formula destined to stay in the past. In our number 8 spot today we have Damascus steel. It's possible you may have heard of Damascus steel before, and that is because the name still exists, and it is used in reference to a variety of pattern welded forged steel products, but the modern day stuff just isn't what it used to be. Historically, Damascus steel was discovered quite a long time ago, and it was used to make swords in the Middle East. It is said that these swords had the ability to cut through rocks or even completely cut through other swords, which is just insane. The exact process of how these swords were made has been lost to time, but it is rumored that Wootz steel was imported from Sri Lanka and used in the creation process along with other metals. Somehow the metals were basically weaved together rather than an alloy being created. This is what led to the steel not only being exceptionally strong, but also flexible, and it is this process that modern day smiths cannot seem to exactly replicate. The modern day Damascus products are definitely high quality, gorgeous products, but it seems as though the secrets of the past may hold something even better. In our number 7 spot today we have silphium. This is less of a technology and more of something that was once naturally occurring and used for a multitude of things, but is now lost. Silphium is a lost genus of fennel plant that was used quite a bit during the Roman times. It was used as a form of birth control as well as a cure for many ailments. The plant is said to have been plentiful once along the coast of what is now Libya. Apparently this plant was something that was highly valued, and it even appeared on several forms of currency because it was so highly appreciated. It is speculated that this plant may have grown only in a small portion of the world, and it was simply just over-harvested until it was driven to extinction. It wasn't used by everyone when it was used, and this could be because it was probably quite expensive. So while this wasn't a man-made creation or technology, I feel like it definitely still applies to today's list as a plant, and its medical properties are something that just may be lost forever. In our number 6 spot today we have the pyramids. Alright, I'm just gonna ask, how the heck were the pyramids built? The more I learn about it, the more I'm convinced it must have been aliens, because it just seems so crazy and intricate and impossibly amazing. The pyramids of ancient Egypt may just appear to be amazing, incredible tombs that are something to be jealous of, but they really are so much more than that. Not only have they given researchers and historians incredible insight to what life in ancient Egypt was like, they have also opened the doors to some of the greatest mysteries. Firstly, there was the transportation of the massive stones that they used, some of which are believed to have come from nearly 500 miles away. Getting all of the materials from point A to point B is more than fascinating in itself, but there's more questions. There were not iron tools or chisels at the time, so how were they able to shape their stonework with such incredible precision? How were they able to finish the tops of the pyramids with the same precision despite their standing over 400 feet tall? And how were they able to build them in such a way that they've been able to withstand all of the elements for 4,500 years? You see what I mean at this point? It is clear that however they were able to build the pyramids in ancient Egypt, we just don't have that kind of technology or knowledge nowadays, because there is no way we'd be able to recreate these amazing structures in the same way as the original. Because people are gonna be like, we could create the pyramids. I'm like, I know we could now, Mr. Crane Operator, but imagine having to go up there all by yourself. No crane in sight. Just you and a big old rock. Good luck. In our number 5 spot today we have the Sloot coding system. Okay, this one isn't exactly ancient, but I still had to talk about it today because I had never even heard of this at all before. Jan Sloot was a Dutch electronics engineer, and in the mid to late 90s he created a data storage method that could hold an entire full-length movie in just 8 kilobytes of data. Considering most modern technologies still require much more data to store a full-length movie, this kind of technology was extremely impressive for the times. Investors of course quickly began to flock to Jan. When he presented his data storage system to a man named Roll Piper from Philips, Roll ended up later leaving Philips in order to join Jan's company. Just days before the code and system was due to be released, Jan ended up being found dead in his garden from what seemed to be a heart attack. This is of course extremely tragic and sad, but you might be sitting there thinking the same thing that I was. His death probably didn't stop people from still seeking the answers that had yet to be released on how this storage system was created. Well, as it turns out, people of course did look, but a key piece of information regarding it all was on a floppy disk that was in Jan's possession. Since his death, no one has ever been able to find this floppy disk that is said to hold these secrets. In our number 4 spot today we have the Antikythera mechanism. The Antikythera mechanism is an extremely mysterious discovery that has stumped researchers ever since it was found. This artifact was found 150 feet below the surface of the Aegean Sea in a shipwreck and is the oldest kind of computer ever recorded, as it was dated back to the 7th century BCE. The author David Childress likened the finding to if they had found a jet plane in King Tut's tomb. That's how bizarre this discovery really was. Due to the complexity and oddity of the finding, alien enthusiasts have believed for quite some time that it may have been technology that was passed down from some sort of superior being. This first analog computer may have had a ton of uses, and researchers aren't 100% sure about all the ways it was used, but it is known to have been some sort of astronomical calculator. It was able to predict eclipses and different planetary placements. The mechanism was able to calculate the position and running time of each planet. How would they have been able to create this without the use of sophisticated astronomical tools? We have been able to recreate the mechanism to see how it functions, but no one is able to tell how it could have possibly been created. In our number 3 spot today we have Mithridate. Mithridate was named after King Mithridate VI, who was the king of Pontus. It is said that he was so terribly afraid of being poisoned that he, over the course of 7 years, adapted his body to different poisons. It is also said that after mixing 45 ingredients together, he was able to create Mithridate, which is said to have been a universal antidote to all poisons. The exact formula has of course been lost to time, but historians have said that it is believed that the antidote contained opium, chopped vipers, and small amounts of both the poisons and their antidotes. Imagine, just opium, just throw it in there, why not? The antidote was originally created around 100 BCE, and it was actually used by many people for centuries, and even apparently as recently as the 19th century. It is unclear how the recipe entirely disappeared, but despite some of the best efforts, no one has been able to recreate it since the last known use. In our number 2 spot today we have Stradivari violins. If you're a string instrument enthusiast, then you definitely have heard of the Stradivari family and the instruments created by them. These instruments were created by 1650 and 1750 and were highly sought after in their day, and even more so now. Apparently these instruments instruments featured an unparalleled sound quality that has been found to be impossible to recreate. The instruments that have survived through to modern day are now worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, so it is abundantly clear that these instruments are incredibly valuable. Here's the catch though. Experts can't agree or figure out what exactly it is that makes them sound so wonderful. Some have speculated that the magnificent sound comes from a fungus that grew in the region, and some think that it is the density of the wood, but regardless, no one really knows for sure. At the end of the day, the secrets of the family art were laid to rest with the Stradivari family. In our number 1 spot today we have Roman cement. Concrete is the most commonly used building material in the world, but our current cement, water, sand, rocks mixture is nothing compared to the original stuff. While our modern concrete was created in the 1700s, there was obviously stuff that was being used before. In fact, concrete was used quite a bit during the antiquity by Egyptians, Assyrians, and Romans. The Romans seemingly used it the most, and they are the ones who really perfected the recipe that we just can't seem to replicate now. Apparently the ancient mixture involved burnt limestone as well as crushed rocks and water, but whatever the heck it was, their structures were a lot more withstanding than ours are now, which has led people to question, how do we get that level of hardiness back in our modern day concrete? And to that I say, like most other things, I do not know. Perhaps this is just another mystery lost to time. Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot we have a death ray. Archimedes, if that's how you say it, was born in 287 BC in the city-state of Syracuse, which at the time was a part of ancient Greece, but now would be a part of Sicily. When the Roman army set sail to lay siege on Syracuse, he began trying to find ways to deal with protecting his home and ways to bring death to those in the Roman army. He used his knowledge of physics to build a weapon that would help fend off those sailing into the city. While he managed to make quite a few effective and honestly very cool gadgets in order to fight these men off, the one we are here to talk about today is the death ray. While this sounds like some sort of crazy laser beam, it is surprisingly much simpler despite us not being able to recreate it today. The death ray was a series of mirrors that reflected concentrated sunlight onto the Roman ships. If you've ever used a magnifying glass in sunlight, you know where this is going. Those concentrated rays of sunlight were enough to set the ships ablaze, and it is said that ship after ship of the Roman fleet all caught fire, only to then sink into the Mediterranean. Many attempts to recreate the death ray have of course happened, and some have been moderately successful, but not in the way that this historical story suggests. Maybe he just had that magic touch. In our number 9 spot today we have Ulfberht. This mysterious sword has been confusing ever since it was discovered by archaeologists. Experts were able to date this sword back to the Viking era sometime from 800 to 1000 AD, but no one could figure out how this sword was made, especially from what technologies were available at the time. It seemed as though this sword was made using techniques that didn't exist until 800 years later when the Industrial Revolution happened, so how could it have been made all this time before? It is said that everything about the sword, from the composition of the metal to the extreme heat needed to forge the blade, it just couldn't have been done at the time, but clearly it was. So how? A blacksmith who tried to recreate the sword using only methods that would have been used then explained that he was unable to make it without resorting to more modern technology. In our number 8 spot today we have Nepenthe. If you're a person who's ever had to be subjected to the process that is antidepressant medication, this one might frustrate you just a little bit. The ancient Greeks and Romans discovered a lot of things, some of which we use now and some that seem to have been lost but could have potentially proved to be exceptionally useful to us, and that is exactly what this one is. Ancient Greeks were known to treat the bereaved with this medicine that seems to have been some sort of a primitive antidepressant. It is said that it was known for its ability to chase sorrow away and also to cause forgetfulness. There are many references to this medicinal plant, but at this point we are completely unsure of which modern plant aligns with these ancient descriptions, or if it even exists at all anymore. In our number 7 spot today we have the telharmonium. The telharmonium is regarded as one of the world's first electronic instruments. This instrument was kind of like an organ, but it used wheels to create different synthetic tones. From here, the tones would be transmitted over telephone wires with the intention of getting the music broadcast so that people could listen in. Considering the fact that this instrument was created in 1897, That's a pretty cool invention for the time, so the fact that it once existed is super cool. Unfortunately, however, the idea was taking too much energy from the grid, which led to it being totally scrapped. Instead of finding out another way to use this instrument or just waiting for technology to advance to a point where this would be able to be used, they just destroyed it. Now, in 2021, not only does the telharmonium not exist, but there aren't even any recordings of it, so it seems as though this might be one thing that's lost forever. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Library of Alexandria. This isn't necessarily technology as we now think of the word, but this certainly was one of the greatest losses we've seen. This library is said to have held a collection of over 1 million scrolls, which are said to have been all of the written works in the world at the time. The library was founded in 300 BC, and it was where the scholars of the time would come to study. It is said that when a person visited the library, they needed to give over any books that they had so that they could be copied and added to the collection of the library. It isn't exactly clear what it was that destroyed it, but rumors range from Julius Caesar accidentally setting it on fire to an invasion that set it ablaze. At the end of the day, the building burned and everything in it was destroyed. What was in that building was absolutely priceless, and we can only guess at what secrets it held. Unfortunately, many of what was in that library wasn't written anywhere else, so it's destined to stay a mystery. In our number 5 spot today, we have Cloudbuster. In the 1950s, a man named William Reich created a pseudoscientific thing that was called a cloudbuster. It is said that this device could manipulate a certain energy that would affect the atmosphere, which would then change the patterns of the weather. The energy that the device is said to manipulate is called Oregon energy. It is said that they actually used this device on a farm in the 1950s, and it actually worked when it ended up calling down rain. Apparently people have tried to make modern cloudbusters, but to severe consequences for both the person who made it as well as the area surrounding their invention. Many people are wondering now if this cloudbuster ever actually worked, and if it did, how? Because we just can't seem to make anything like it. If you had a working cloudbuster, what would you do with it? Do you make a snowstorm? A perfectly rainy day? I don't know. Let me know down below in the comments what you would do. In our number 4 spot today, we have Starlight. Starlight was created in the 1970s and 80s by a British hairstylist and amateur chemist, Maurice Ward. What Starlight was a heat-resistant plastic that was basically indestructible. This plastic could withstand temperatures of 10,000 degrees Celsius, and it could withstand a force 75 times that of Hiroshima. Of course, when people heard about this invention, it became the talk of the town. When Maurice brought the material on TV, he covered an egg in Starlight, blasted it with a blowtorch for 5 minutes, and then when the Starlight was peeled back, the egg was still cold. NASA of course wanted to know what the heck Starlight was and how they could get their hands on it, but Maurice was really worried about what would happen if his invention fell into the wrong hands. This led to him keeping the makeup of Starlight a complete secret that he took with him to his grave. It has been said that the company ThermaShield has been able to replicate Starlight when they received the rights in 2013, so maybe this one will be making a comeback after all. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Apollo Gemini space program technology. This isn't necessarily technology that has been entirely lost, but it has been the source of many confused scientists. The race to get to space was a fast, cutthroat one, with everyone trying to be the first. With everyone running around trying to create all of these new technologies before anyone else, and with private contractors being brought on for certain things in order to help, all of the schematics and original components are so disorganized and scattered that now NASA staff are trying to reverse engineer the entire thing to see how it all worked together in tandem. Not to mention how those private contractors of course took all of their records with them, leaving no records behind for anyone to be able to get a full view of how this was all able to take place. I guess no matter the rush, it's equally as important to keep the documentation. You would think that NASA would have had someone just to keep documents, right? I feel like there's gotta be someone out there who's got that job now. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Wardenclyffe Tower. This tower was also known as the Tesla Tower, so I'm sure you can guess who built it. This tower was an early experimental wireless transmission station that was designed by Nikola Tesla. It was located in Long Island in 1901 and 1902. So here's the thing. The industrialist J.P. Morgan was the one who asked Tesla to create this wireless tower that could send messages across the world. Okay, sweet. That's super useful to us, so that would be great, right? Well, what Tesla built was even better. It was a device that would transmit free electricity across the world. What? Free electricity? That's amazing! Well, when Mr. Morgan found out, he shut the project down, had the tower destroyed, and ruined it for everyone. Imagine we all had free energy right now. I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little irritated now that I know this. Tesla's ability to wirelessly power light bulbs and other devices short distances is something that we still cannot replicate or implement in an economic way today. In our number 1 spot today we have the Tesla oscillator. Have you ever wanted to live through an earthquake on purpose? No? Me neither. And good thing we don't, because this little old gadget doesn't exist anymore. Apparently Nikola Tesla did though, when he built the Tesla oscillator, also known as the earthquake machine. This oscillator resonated at such a frequency it shook the buildings around him. While this wasn't the intended use, this is what ended up happening. It is said that he couldn't get it to shut down, so then he had to take a sledgehammer to it to destroy it and stop the shaking. Since this destruction and accidental earthquake, no one has ever been able to replicate the same sort of thing. And that's probably a good thing, to be perfectly honest.
Coming in number 10, we have flexible glass. I mean, think of what we could do with a substance like that. You could make windows that never break. You could make a cup that never breaks. You make a bunch of other things that could never break. Basically, it would be an extremely durable version of everyday glass, and you could bet that would be a hot selling item. The first record of flexible glass happened between the years 14 and 37 AD. There was the great Emperor Tiberius who would take exotic goods from all over the land. There was a glassmaker who came to him with something very unique. It was a beautiful vase. He handed it to the emperor, who dropped it by accident, but the vase didn't break. It dented. The glassmaker quickly repaired it in front of the emperor as a way to impress him, but it didn't work like that. The emperor saw this as a threat, for his empire had a ton of wealth in precious metals to make various items. This flexible glass could have hurt business, so to hide the secret of this glassmaker, he had him taken to the dungeon and killed. Not how this dude probably thought this was going to play out. And if you comb through history, there were a couple more times where this mysterious material pops up, but it never has made its way to this day and age. Who knows? Maybe someone will make this material and be able to keep their head on their shoulders. And guys, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps us out. Coming in number 9, we have the Hufunj Di Dong Yi. How do you know when an earthquake has happened? Well, you need a bunch of high-tech gear to tell you when it hit and how powerful it was. Well, that is actually dead wrong. There was a device in ancient China that was made by Zheng Hong. He was an incredible genius for his time and created a seismograph that was incredibly accurate. This thing was basically a big pot that would move with the shifting earth. There was a pendulum inside it that could point you in the direction of where an earthquake had just hit, and this device had an incredible range and could reach up to 100 miles away. The benefit of this was an emperor could find out what villages needed help because they were just hit by a natural disaster well before they sent an envoy to come receive help. How could you make something like that with just some pot and levers? I mean, if I was alive back then, I probably would have thought earthquakes happened because you didn't give enough grain to the river god. Coming in at number 8, we have a heat ray. I mean, we have all wanted ray guns since we were kids. When will we finally get some cool futuristic weapons that can blow our minds? Well, you might want to look into the past to find something like that. The ancient Greeks had a way to blast heat at enemy ships and set them ablaze. They would have massive bronze plates that would redirect the sun's rays back at enemy ships that were approaching through the water. This would focus it like a magnifying glass and burn these ships like a weird kid who's killing ants. So the ancient Greeks had a heat ray before we had a heat ray now? That is really starting to bother me right now. Coming in number 7, we have the pyramids. I mean, this one was a given. You can't make a list of amazing ancient relics without throwing the pyramids on that list, because we still don't know what happened. How did they build these big ass triangles? They are over 4,000 years old. They are 147 meters high. They have a ton of rooms and secret chambers and booby traps and detailed markings all over the walls. The Egyptians didn't have access to modern metals or even wheels. There's an estimated 2 million stones in a single pyramid. The stones weigh somewhere between 1.5 and 3 tons. How on earth did they do it? Some people say aliens, which I don't believe. I mean, it could have been some space dudes, but I would hope that they would give us something a little bit better than rock towers. I mean, give us a ray gun or something, that's what I want. But some people think that the Egyptians could have had access to some sort of tech that was far advanced for their time, but they either destroyed it because they didn't want anyone else to use it, or the tech was simply lost to time. Coming in at number 6, we have the Unartok disc. Have you ever tried to use a GPS other than Google Maps or Waze? They will take you all over the place and have you parked in some field that's 6 miles away from your destination. Maybe not that bad, but the Vikings had a device that put some of these apps to shame. The Unartok disc was a sundial type compass that could be used to navigate through the seas with an accuracy that was as good as a modern day compass. This explains how the Vikings were able to travel such great distances and always make it back to their homeland. But when you're making these long trips, eventually the sun will go down, and then everyone is going to be praying that you don't get thrown off course while the sun isn't up. But the Vikings found a way to get this bad boy to work even when there was no light. How do you get a sundial to work in the dark? Well, you have magic crystals. That's how the ancient texts describe them. Did these Vikings have help from the gods? Well, probably not. What these crystals could most likely do was project light onto this compass when there was only a very small light source. So with the moon and the stars, you would be able to navigate endured seas. Coming in at number 5, we have the boomerang. Alright guys, now it's time to head down under for one of the oldest, most advanced hunting tools that we have ever seen. Sure, we have things that can kill things more effectively now than a boomerang does, but we have to appreciate how precise and deadly these things were, and how you can find some ancient relics of boomerangs that seem to be better built than the ones we have today. And in case you didn't know, boomerangs are basically a wing. Someone invented something that could fly around 2,300 years ago. Well, that is the oldest boomerang ever found, so the first one could have been even older than that. Before people had shoes, someone made something that could not only fly and kill something, but it would also return to them. I don't know who that guy was, but whoever he was an absolute legend. That guy for sure chucked that thing for the first time, and the whole tribe was like, dude, you are going to be king forever because that is the coolest thing that I have ever seen in my life. I literally don't know how the sun works, and you just made a flying stick that comes back to you like a dog fetching a ball. This is amazing. Coming in at number 4, we have Greek fire. This is one of the biggest mysteries of ancient Greek warfare. See, the Greeks had a weapon like none other. It was fired out of a long metallic tube that was attached to boats. It was some sort of napalm-like substance that they would fire out of these tubes, and it would lace enemy ships in a flaming substance that couldn't be put out by simply pouring water on it. It must have looked like a dragon breathing fire on you. The secret as to how they were able to make such a weapon never leaked out into the wrong hands. So to this day, we still have no idea how they were able to do it. Maybe some future dudes came back in time and was like, hey, you guys want to see something that's really gonna blow your mind? Well, let me show you this wild thing right here real quick. If you were an enemy getting blasted by this stuff, you would have for sure thought it was magic. Coming in at number 3, we have ancient Chinese wells. You know how we're burning through a ton of fossil fuels right now, and after saying that, I literally understand why they call them fossil fuels, because it's fuel that comes from fossils? God, I am dumb sometimes. Well, we all know that there are much cleaner forms of energy that we should probably be using because the world seems like it's gonna die if we don't change up our tactics. Well, in ancient China, they had tapped into wells that were full of natural gas. They dug wells deep into the ground, and this was originally so they could harvest salt inland, because it was very hard to get salt without going down to the ocean unless you dug these massive wells. But with this, they found shots of methane. They then built bamboo tubes that led to people's homes so they could use the natural gas to heat their houses. That's pretty cool if you ask me, but now that I'm thinking about it, methane isn't the cleanest energy, but it's still amazing tech to have a natural gas chute that goes directly to your home. Coming in number 2, we have the Ulfberth sword. There was a tomb found in Scandinavia that had some amazing swords in it. There were over 100 swords discovered, and there was something that set these bladed weapons apart from all the others from the era. They were much more advanced than any other swords that were made from nations around that time. These blades were made out of 99.9% pure metal. I mean, if you were to look into most metal objects today, I'm sure they would be skimping somewhere. The metal pieces in your car probably have little bits of plastic in them to help cut cost. What was so impressive about these weapons is that the surrounding areas would not get this kind of technology until 800 800 years later. Between the compass that you could use in the dark when you were out on the ocean and the swords that were 800 years ahead of their time, it's no wonder that the Vikings were able to be such a force of destruction. And coming at the number 1 spot, we have Mithridatium. That sounds like something that would be pulled out of a Tolkien book, but it's actually one of the most mysterious substances made by King Mithridates IV of Pontius. This guy was living during Emperor Nero's reign around 60 BC. The king had developed a substance called Mithridatium, which was apparently an antidote to all poisons. Sounds like a pretty handy tool, especially if you're a king or emperor. We all know that people are trying to poison them at all hours of the day. Now, the recipe for this substance was never let out to the public. Only the king and Emperor Nero himself knew how to make it, and maybe they should have told a few more people because eventually the formula was lost, and since then, no one has been able to recreate this elixir. But maybe it was all a lie. Nero could have spread rumors that he had such a tool so people wouldn't be so bold to poison him. I mean, that would be a pretty smart move.
There are moments in archaeology that leave even the most skeptical scientists scratching their heads. We're told history moves in a straight line, from primitive tools to smartphones. But what if that's not entirely true? What if some ancient civilizations had access to technology so advanced they'd rival what we have today? In this video, we're diving into real-world discoveries that suggest ancient people may have possessed knowledge that has either been lost or deliberately buried. These aren't legends, these are facts. So let's dig into the lost civilizations with technology that shouldn't have existed. When you think of ancient Mesopotamia, batteries probably aren't the first thing that come to mind. But in 1938, a strange clay jar was discovered near Baghdad. Inside, a copper cylinder surrounding an iron rod. Fill it with vinegar or lemon juice and you get a working battery. Scholars believe it could have been used for electroplating or medicinal purposes. The technology is 2,000 years old, but it closely mimics modern battery design. And the weirdest part? There's no written record explaining its use. Did the Parthians understand electricity better than we give them credit for, or what else could have been going on here? In Karnataka, India, the Hoysala temple contains elaborate carvings from the 12th century that seem to defy historical context. Among them are figures that look suspiciously like modern astronauts, complete with helmet-like domes and apparatus on their backs. While many historians say they represent mythological beings, others suggest these carvings reflect a technological understanding that should not have existed at that time. Did the sculptors see something we've forgotten, or something that they weren't supposed to? High in the Bolivian Andes lies the ruins of Pumapunku, a site so precisely constructed that it defies logic. Massive stones weighing up to 130 tons were somehow transported from quarries miles away. But it's the stone cutting that's most baffling. The blocks have perfectly machined surfaces, right angles, and holes drilled with symmetry that would require modern tools today. No writing, no explanation, just perfect stonework from a culture that left little behind. So now we're here today asking, how did they do it? This one looks like just another Roman chalice, until light hits it. Then the Lycurgus cup glows an eerie red from behind and green from the front. It's unfortunately not a magic trick. Scientists discovered that the glass contains particles of gold and silver as small as 50 nanometers. That is literally nanotechnology. Roman artisans somehow figured out how to manipulate materials at a microscopic level, something we didn't accomplish again until the 20th century. Did they even understand what they were doing, or was it just an accident of incredible experimentation? I don't know, because this is just absolutely insane to think of. How did they do it? And how can I get one of those cups? In the Hathor Temple at Dendera, Egypt, strange carvings depict what looks eerily like a giant light bulb. We're back with more ancient electricity, complete with a filament and even a power cord. Dubbed the Dendera light, the carving has sparked decades of debate. Skeptics call it symbolic, but supporters point to experiments where replicas actually produced light using similar designs. There's no soot on the ceilings, suggesting the Egyptians didn't use use torches, so could they have harnessed some form of electricity thousands of years before Edison? Maybe that's how they built the things after all. I don't know. The pyramids are truly some of the most mysterious megaliths we have on the planet. What is going on? What was going on in ancient Egypt? Can somebody build a time machine so we can just put it to rest once and for all, you know? The Greek historian Herodotus once described an incredible engineering marvel in Egypt: machines used to regulate water levels in Lake Moeris. These were allegedly part of an ancient hydraulic system used to irrigate vast agricultural areas, but no such machines have ever been recovered, and scholars remain divided on whether Herodotus exaggerated. Still, the scale of the lake and the surrounding canals hint at complex engineering that shouldn't have been possible during that era. Discovered in 1992 by a group of villagers in China, the Longyu Caves are hand-carved stone chambers stretching hundreds of meters underground. What stuns researchers is not just their scale, but the uniformity of the chisel marks. Every surface shows signs of meticulous, repetitive carving, possibly by unknown tools. There's no records of their construction, no mention in any historical texts, yet they remain structurally sound. Who built them, how, and why remains a total mystery. Outside of Cusco, Peru, lies Sacsayhuaman, a fortress built with stones so massive and so precisely interlocked that you can't even slip a piece of paper between them. No mortar, just perfect fits. And this is just one of many places like this in Peru specifically. Some of the stones weigh over 100 tons and were transported over steep terrain with no wheels or metal tools. It's just absolutely insane. Even more puzzling, if this could get crazier, is how they achieved earthquake resistance by cutting the stones with slight curves, a technique that modern architects admire but only recently began to replicate. How crazy is it that we're taking a look back at ancient civilizations to figure out how we can have earthquake-resistant buildings today in 2025? Like, that's crazy. That's crazy, and how did we not look sooner? You know, the people who live in earthquake zones are struggling out here. Have you guys ever been in an earthquake before? Let me know. That's how I know that you're still watching this video, okay? Tell me about your earthquake experience. Here, I've never been in an earthquake. There's not a lot of places in Canada where you can experience an earthquake, so let me know what it's like. In Delhi, India, stands a 1,600-year-old iron pillar that refuses to rust. Despite being exposed to harsh weather and pollution, the 23-foot structure is still standing with minimal corrosion. Metallurgists discovered that it's made from high phosphorus iron with a protective passive film, a process unknown in modern metallurgy until recently. How did 4th century blacksmiths create a material that defies nature? The technology behind this ironwork remains partly a mystery even still to this day. It was just a wooden artifact in a tomb near Saqqara, a bird-shaped object dated to 200 BCE. But when aviation experts looked closer, they noticed aerodynamic features far too precise just for decoration. The wings had lift-generating curves, the body balanced like a glider, and when researchers built a scale model and added a tail stabilizer, it actually flew. Could this be an ancient toy, or was it evidence the Egyptians had a basic understanding of flight long before the Wright brothers? I don't know, it just seems too good to be just a coincidence, you know what I'm saying? And they built those pyramids, like clearly they knew something was going on.
Imagine a time when weapons could burn on water and airships floated like luxury hotels in the sky. Some of the most groundbreaking inventions in history weren't always welcomed with open arms. These are the strangest historical inventions that were banned for being too advanced. In the 7th century, the Byzantine Empire created something that might as well have been magic, known as Greek fire. It was a weapon that could burn on water, stick to anything it touched, and continued to burn even after being doused in water. It was very ahead of its time. As you can imagine, this was mostly used in naval warfare, and it was so devastating that it helped keep the Byzantines in control of their empire for centuries. The exact formula for Greek fire was kept a closely guarded secret. A lot of historians believe that it involved a mixture of ingredients like sulfur, naphtha, a flammable liquid hydrocarbon mixture, and a chemical compound called quicklime, but no one really knows for sure. The Byzantine navy would deploy it using special siphons mounted on ships, spraying the burning liquid onto enemy vessels. The fear surrounding Greek fire was so intense that some believed it had mystical powers, and everyone was desperate to figure out how to replicate it. But the secret was lost over time, and by the end of the empire, the knowledge of Greek fire disappeared with it. So, not necessarily banned, but no longer a thing, thankfully. The invention of the mechanical clock in the 13th century was pretty huge, to say the least. Before this, people relied on sundials, water clocks, or church bells to track time, but when mechanical clocks came onto the scene, they completely transformed things. Being able to measure time accurately meant people could schedule work more precisely, leading to a much more efficient and productive day-to-day existence. And I know what you're thinking, why is the mechanical clock on the list? It never went away. Well, that almost wasn't the case. See, this new technology wasn't universally welcomed. Some were scared that precise timekeeping would disrupt the traditional rhythm of life. Work hours became regulated, and people's lives were governed by the clock rather than the sun. Some places banned the widespread use of mechanical clocks at first because of this massive shift, and some even feared the influence it could have on religion, as the bell ringing of church clocks wouldn't be the main way to track time for daily activities and prayers anymore. The introduction of the mechanical clock signaled the start of industrialization, and with that came new social challenges. As the technology became more widespread, there was a major shift from a society that lived in harmony with natural cycles to one that was now governed by this constant ticking machine. In a lot of ways, the clock became a symbol of progress and a tool for control. It was the dawn of a new age, but also a sign that technology would soon have a much deeper impact on how people live their lives. You know, not to be overly dramatic or anything like that. In the early 1900s, the Zeppelin revolutionized air travel. Unlike airplanes, this massive airship could carry passengers across countries with far more comfort. It's not often that you see images of what the insides of these things looked like for passenger travel, but oh boy, were they lavish. Invented by Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin, they were considered marvels of engineering. But as useful as they were also dangerously vulnerable, especially during wartime. In fact, Zeppelins were used extensively by Germany during World War I for bombing raids over Britain. But with the development of faster, more agile aircraft, they became obsolete. But then there was the infamous Hindenburg disaster in 1937 when the Zeppelin LZ-129, one of the largest airships ever built, caught fire during a landing in New Jersey. It crashed, killing 36 people, and at that point people just weren't really that enthused about riding in Zeppelins anymore. Zeppelins are still used for advertising today, but the crash led to the banning of commercial travel. Vikings were expert navigators who traveled vast distances across the seas, often in pretty crappy weather, and one of the tools they would have used to navigate was a mysterious crystal known as the sunstone, thought to be a form of Iceland spar, a form of calcite that has the ability to polarize light. This helped them determine the position of the sun even when the sky was overcast or when they were navigating in the long Arctic nights. This could have allowed the Viking explorers to confidently chart their course, but the Vikings never left any detailed records of their navigation methods, and the sunstone's use wasn't fully understood until centuries later. By the time we caught wind of it, its use had faded into myth, and the technology was mostly forgotten. If the Vikings had fully utilized the sunstone and passed down their knowledge, who knows how much further they could have gone. Leonardo da Vinci was hundreds of years ahead of his time. In the late 15th century, he sketched plans for what he called an aerial screw, a device that looks very similar to a helicopter. His design had a large screw-like spiral that would theoretically lift a machine off the ground. While it was never built, and probably wouldn't have worked with the technology of the time, he still envisioned the mechanics of flight long before powered aircraft became a thing. The problem with his helicopter was that it relied on the human body's power to turn the screws. You'd have to manually crank it, which, as you might guess, wouldn't have spun nearly fast enough to get the thing off the ground, let alone have it stay there. While it wasn't banned per se, it was practically ignored for centuries as something too outlandish for its time. But the really cool thing is that today we do have machines based on this exact concept. Of course, powered by far more reliable energy sources than human muscle. Imagine having to manually move a helicopter like a paddle boat. That's silly. I kind of like that idea. Nikola Tesla, known for his genius in electrical engineering, invented the Tesla coil in 1891 as a way to demonstrate wireless energy transmission. The coil could produce high voltage electricity, and with it, Tesla dreamed of sending power without wires to anywhere in the world. At the time, this idea was revolutionary, but also incredibly dangerous. Tesla demonstrated his invention by making the air crackle with lightning bolts, showing that electricity could jump large distances. And this, of course, was terrifying to some folks. It opened the door to far too many possibilities, from weaponized energy to unregulated power grids. Some say that certain powerful people were actually afraid of Tesla's ideas, and that's why his coil was banned in certain places. While wireless transmission didn't really take off during his time, Tesla's coil did lay the groundwork for future breakthroughs. It ended up becoming a symbol of what could have been if the world had been ready to embrace it. Well, today, the Tesla coil is still a crowd favorite at science museums at least, but it does make you wonder, what could our world look like now if wireless energy had been fully developed back then? The concept of automata, self-operating machines, sounds like a pretty modern idea, but it actually dates back centuries. The 18th century is when things really started to get interesting. Craftsmen like Jacques de Vaucanson made complex mechanical figures that could do some pretty amazing things for their day, like a life-size figure that would play 12 different melodies on a flute. He built that in 1735. Devices like these were more than just toys, they were early versions of robots, way ahead of their time. But they were very complex and costly, so only a few were ever built. As these automatons became more popular, some started to worry about what they represented. Some were scared that they were a sign that humanity was being replaced by machines. Well, that sounds very similar to the types of fears people are having today. There were also rumors at the time that these creations had occult or supernatural powers. That's more fittingly old-timey. But because of these fears, though, devices like this were sometimes banned, especially in certain parts of Europe where the clergy and rulers worried about the implications of machines that could mimic human behavior. Automata weren't just inventions of the Renaissance, though. They actually had their roots in ancient Greece. Greek engineers like Hero of Alexandria built early steam-powered machines that could open doors or even serve drinks. He created an ancient version of a vending machine. You'd insert a coin and this machine would pour a drink for you. Just nuts. These things were clearly groundbreaking. Some think that Hero's automated systems might have been used in temples too, powered by steam to create these awe-inspiring spectacles. But a lot of the knowledge about these machines was lost for centuries, and some people think it might have been purposely hidden, maybe to avoid shaking up the social order or threatening traditional jobs. Imagine if the Greeks had really gone all in on this stuff, though. They could have ended up with a way more advanced society. Who knows how different things might have looked if those creations hadn't been forgotten over time. Charles Babbage's difference engine, developed in the 1830s, is often hailed as the first mechanical computer. His design could perform very complex calculations, a task that would have been an incredible time saver for mathematicians at the time. The invention was a huge leap forward, but it came with a hefty price tag and the suspicion of a government that wasn't entirely convinced that it was necessary. After Babbage's funding was pulled, he couldn't finish the project, and and the difference engine was left as nothing more than a fascinating concept. It wasn't until the late 20th century that engineers successfully built a working version of his design, proving that his ideas were way ahead of their time. Some say the British government might have banned the project out of sheer lack of understanding or fear of how this technology could impact workers, industries, and jobs. But whatever the reason, Babbage's dream to create an automated machine for calculations didn't come to be in his lifetime, and computing didn't make the leap forward until much later. In the mid-1800s, the first ironclad warships were introduced, revolutionizing naval warfare. These ships, which had iron armor plating instead of traditional wooden hulls, made wooden ships pretty much obsolete. The most famous ironclads were the USS Monitor and the CSS Virginia, which famously faced off during the American Civil War. These ships changed naval battles forever, and because ironclads were so effective, wooden ships were just phased out, and the technology was quickly adopted by countries around the world. The idea of an impenetrable ship made with advanced materials like iron created a new arms race in naval technology. Ironclads may have been banned or scrapped in some countries, but they certainly paved the way for modern naval warfare. Nikola Tesla is one of the greatest minds of the 20th century. In fact, he helped shape much of the tech we use to this day.
Unfortunately, or fortunately, many of his inventions have been lost to history.
Remote control navies, cameras that could photograph a person's imagination.
And of course, the death ray.
Nikola Tesla is famous for his work with electricity, but he also worked on military technology. Like Alfred Nobel, he thought the best way to stop wars was to make them so terrible that no one would want to fight. Tesla invented a small boat that could be controlled with radio signals. He could start it, stop it, steer it without anyone actually being on board. His idea was that if you could take humans out of the fight, battleships would stop being built, and that, quote, the most tremendous artillery afloat will be of no more use than so much scrap iron. Back in 1898, at Madison Square Garden, Tesla showed off this boat to the public. The boat was a small unmanned vessel that Tesla controlled with a radio transmitter. This was way ahead of its time. Remote control technology was just unheard of back then. At the time, people were so baffled that some even thought he was using magic or mind control to steal the boat. So this invention did technically see the light of day, just not on the massive scale he was envisioning.
Call it a death ray, or as Tesla would, call it a peace ray. According to Tesla, prior to his death in 1943 and the Cold War in 1947, he had been working on a particle beam that could produce enough energy to destroy entire armies, no matter how far away they might be. I mean, there were limits. The beam wouldn't have been able to bend across the Earth to reach adversaries on the other side of the globe, but it did have pretty good range and it was incredibly powerful. He pitched the idea to a number of governments, including the US government and the Soviet Union. Can you guess who took him up on his offer? The Soviets. Luckily, as far as we know, Tesla was never actually able to create the weapon, but just to be sure, after Tesla's passing, the US government went to the hotel where he had been staying and pretty much ransacked the place. To their relief, they found no proof that the weapon had ever made it past the conceptualization stage. Or so they say. For all we know, they've got it stored away somewhere in a secure military facility under lock and key, just waiting for the perfect moment to unleash all hell on some unlucky enemy. Only time will tell.
So Tesla had an interesting philosophy on how world peace would be achieved. Basically, create something so terrifyingly dangerous that no one would ever want to use it, thus scaring world leaders out of engaging in violent conflicts, kind of like the death ray. Another one of these scary ideas was the artificial tidal wave, a tidal wave that could be set off at will. The idea was that this massive wave could be used as a weapon in naval warfare to wipe out enemy ships. Tesla believed he could generate this tidal wave by using a series of synchronized explosions underwater. He thought up a machine that could trigger these explosions remotely, creating a wave so powerful it would crash down on enemy fleets, causing massive destruction. At the time, the papers wrote that this artificial tidal wave technology would render navies useless and bring humanity one step closer to world peace. But the invention never actually came to be. at least that we know of.
In 1901, Tesla began working on a groundbreaking invention that would change the way the world viewed electricity. A 185-foot tall, mushroom-shaped wireless energy tower that could transmit messages and images to ships at sea and across the Atlantic Ocean, and power the entirety of New York City by transmitting millions of volts of electricity through the air using only the Earth to conduct the signals. In order to do this, he secured a $150,000 grant from American financier and investment banker J.P. Morgan, who you might have heard of from our Titanic videos. For 5 years, Tesla worked tirelessly on his invention, but unfortunately, his vision never came to fruition because in 1906, Morgan cut his funding, likely due to the fact that if Tesla was successful in his endeavor, he would have greatly decreased or even eradicated the profits of Morgan's other energy sector holdings, which is too bad because I personally would really love it if I didn't have to pay an electric bill once a month, but c'est la vie, I suppose. Now, eradicating electric bills and improving Atlantic communications weren't the only things Tesla had hoped to use his wireless energy transmitter for. Oh no, in fact, the entire idea was actually sparked by Nikola Tesla's love of flight, and the tower was really just a prelude to what he had actually hoped to create: electric-powered supersonic airships. In 1919, Tesla told Reconstruction magazine that he had once planned on developing aircrafts that would hover 8 miles above Earth's surface and fly at speeds that would allow pilots to travel from New York City to London in just 3 hours. But of course, in order for this to work, he would have had to have been successful in creating his wireless transmitter, because the aircrafts he dreamed of did not carry fuel. Of course, this never went ahead because the transmitter was never completed, but think of how much different life would have been if it worked.
At the top, I discussed Nikola Tesla's idea about building a fleet of remote-controlled ships, but he didn't want to stop there. He imagined a world where almost every vehicle would be remote-operated, and not just vehicles, but just full-on robots too. After he'd showed off his remote-control boat, a reporter suggested it could be used as a weapon, like a torpedo carrying dynamite. Tesla reportedly flipped out at this and quickly set the record straight. He told the reporter that what he was showing wasn't just a weapon, but the first of a new kind of machines, robots. He called them mechanical men, stating, quote, "You do not see there a wireless torpedo, you see there the first of a race of robots, mechanical men, which will do the laborious work of the human race." What he wanted was a future where robots would help people by taking over tough and dangerous tasks, making life easier and safer for everyone, at the same time allowing us to focus on more creative things that machines would never be able to do. Unfortunately, today, pretty much the exact opposite has happened thanks to AI, but that's a topic for another video. Tesla was always thinking about new ways to harness energy. One of his big ideas was the concept of solar and wind energy. Tesla believed that the sun and earth were huge, untapped sources of energy that could be used to power everything. He imagined creating devices that could capture sunlight and turn it into electricity. But Tesla didn't want to stop there. He also thought about ways to send this solar power wirelessly so people everywhere could use it without needing to be connected to power lines. Tesla's ideas about solar power were way ahead of his time. Today, we have solar panels and other technology to capture energy from the sun, but Tesla was dreaming about this over 100 years ago. He referred to solar and wind energy at the time as cosmic energy. Now, solar power has been used on a smaller scale for centuries, but it wouldn't be implemented in the types of ways we see it being used today until much later.
In the 1890s, Tesla created something pretty terrifying: an earthquake machine. By accident. You see, in 1893, Tesla patented a machine that generated electricity through steam-powered oscillation. The purpose of the machine was to vibrate fast enough to generate electricity, which it did, but then it also did something else. One day, while attempting to tune the machine to his house, things got a bit out of hand. The ground began to shake, but instead of turning the machine off, it's Tesla, he decided to turn it up. and that's when he heard a loud crack. All of a sudden, it was as though he had created a full-on earthquake in his house. Heavy machinery, notes, and books were falling over and flying off of tables and walls. Tesla's reaction? To take a hammer to the generator and destroy it before it destroyed him. If he hadn't, who knows what could have happened. Perhaps the small man-made earthquake would have created a chain reaction that ended in the whole world collapsing and many of us having never been born. What kind of world would that be? When the police arrived, he told his staff to stay quiet about the whole thing. So it wasn't until many years later when he told the story that this terrible invention was revealed. However, it did lead to generators, so good job, Tesla.
Tesla was even picturing weather control long before it was being whispered about on message boards on the internet over a century later. He believed that with the right technology, it might be possible to influence and change weather patterns. He thought he could use electricity to make it rain or prevent storms using powerful electrical machines to send energy into the atmosphere, which could then affect the weather. For example, if there was a drought, his theoretical machines could create rain to help crops grow, or if there was a dangerous storm, the machines could calm it down before it caused any serious damage. Tesla's weather control idea was based on his understanding of how energy and the atmosphere work together. Now, of course, he never built the machine that could actually control the weather, but as always, his ideas were ahead of his time. Nowadays, scientists are still exploring ways to influence the weather. Some say they've already succeeded.
Now here's a thought. Camera. In 1933, Nikola Tesla attempted to invent a thought camera. He said he was convinced that a definitive image formed in thought must, by reflex action, produce a corresponding image on the retina, which might be read by a suitable apparatus. In order to test this theory, Tesla conceptualized a plan, which consisted of reflecting an image on an artificial retina, taking a photograph, and projecting that image onto a screen. A process which he theorized would allow people's imagination and thoughts to be read as though they were an open book. Of course, this didn't work because that's not how eyeballs work, but it was certainly an interesting thought, one that we couldn't see on a screen. On the other hand, if it had worked, which it didn't, I mean it never made it out of the conceptualization stage, it would have revolutionized lie detecting and interrogation methods. And then maybe MK Ultra would have never happened.
Thousands of inventions have been locked away by the US government under secrecy orders. In the 90s, GM rolled out a sleek electric car that customers loved, but then crushed every single one of them. And a water-powered car was either a scam or something so disruptive, the inventor didn't live to tell the full story. These are inventions that were suppressed because they worked too well. Here's something most people don't know. There are thousands of inventions we're not even allowed to know about. Since 1951, the US has had something called the Invention Secrecy Act, which lets the government slap a secrecy order on any patent application if they think it could be a threat to national security. That doesn't mean it's necessarily a weapon, it just means it works a little too well. As of the most recent numbers, over 5,000 inventions are still under secrecy orders. Stuff like radar and stealth technology have been kept under wraps, but there's also more out there stuff, like people who claim they've invented machines that could make free energy or engines that could move spaceships without using fuel. Inventors like Robert Gold and James Constant both filed patents that were immediately locked down. They weren't allowed to talk about their inventions, publish papers, or commercialize them. In some cases, the orders last decades. The government can even renew them indefinitely. There's no way to know what's in those hidden patents unless the order gets lifted, and even then, they often show up heavily redacted. Back in the late 90s, General Motors put out an electric car called the EV1. It was sleek, fast, totally electric, and people who drove them absolutely loved them. Celebrities like Tom Hanks and Mel Gibson got in on it. And then GM pulled the plug. Not only did they stop making them, they recalled every single car and crushed them. Officially, GM claimed the cars weren't profitable and there wasn't enough demand, but the people who had them strongly disagreed. The EV1 worked. There were charging stations in California, the cars were reliable, and they didn't rely on gas, and that might have been the problem. There's a whole documentary called Who Killed the Electric Car that dives into this. It talks about how oil companies weren't too thrilled about a car that needed no oil changes, no gas, barely any maintenance. Some say the car died not because it failed, but because it worked a little too well. In the 90s, an inventor named Stanley Meyer claimed he created a car that could run on water. He made what he called a water fuel cell, which supposedly split water into hydrogen and oxygen efficiently enough to power a car. He even got a patent for the technology, and there are videos of him demonstrating a working dune buggy using only water as fuel. Of course, this was a huge deal. For real, oil wouldn't be nearly as important anymore. Meyer turned down million-dollar offers, and even the Pentagon reportedly showed interest, but then the story took a turn. Meyer was sued for fraud, and the court ruled that he misrepresented his invention. Some say he just didn't play by the rules big corporations wanted. And then in 1998, while having dinner at a restaurant in Ohio with two Belgian investors, Meyer suddenly ran outside clutching his throat and collapsed. His brother claimed that his last words were, "They poisoned me." The official cause of death was a brain aneurysm, but this obviously set off some conspiracy theories. To this day, no one successfully reproduced Meyer's water fuel cell. Was it a scam? Yeah, probably, but it's a pretty strange story all the same. Now, this one's wild, because it actually worked and even made it to the prototype stage. In 2007, Indian automaker Tata Motors signed a huge deal with French engineer Guy Negret and his company Motor Development International to produce a car powered entirely by compressed air. Negret had been working on air-powered prototypes since 1997, and by 2004, the first AirPod models were rolling. These tiny vehicles, nicknamed the AirPod, could reach around 43 to 60 miles per hour and run up to 135 miles on a full 175-liter tank, filled in just 90 seconds. There were plans for commercial rollout in India by 2010 to 2011, but by 2009, Tata admitted the technology still had problems. The AirPod could only drive about 80 to 130 miles before needing to refill the air tanks. That's not terrible, but for regular drivers, it's a lot less than what gas cars can do. Plus, refilling stations for compressed air weren't set up anywhere, so practical use was a headache. Guy passed away in June of 2016, and promises that AirPods would hit the market by 2020 never came to be. Back in the 1930s, a guy named Royal Raymond Rife claimed that he had built a machine that could kill cancer cells using electromagnetic frequencies, basically blasting tumors with specific radio waves without hurting the healthy cells. Rife actually demonstrated his machine to doctors and investors, and some early reports were promising, but then his lab was conveniently destroyed by a fire. One theory is that pharmaceutical companies felt threatened by his technology because it could have wiped out cancer without expensive treatments and surgery. The official story was that there wasn't enough proof, and the medical world dismissed Rife's work as quackery. After that, research on his device pretty much stopped. To this day, no solid clinical trials have backed the machine, but there are still people out there who swear by Rife machines for alternative cancer treatment. The idea of machines that give off more energy than they use, free energy, has been around for over a century. Nikola Tesla had this giant tower in New York called the Wardenclyffe that was supposed to beam wireless electricity across the world. Then you've got Townsend Brown, who claimed he figured out a way to reduce gravity using high voltage disks. And Henry Moray said he built a box that could pull electricity straight out of the environment. Even if one of these actually worked the way they claimed, it would have completely changed the world. But every time someone came up with one of these inventions, it either got shut down, buried, or was just laughed off as junk science. Tesla's tower was torn down, Brown's work never made it past the lab, Moray's device vanished after endless legal trouble. Now, was all this stuff just bogus? I mean, most likely, yeah, but is there a slim chance that the technology actually worked and got quietly buried by big energy companies? Hey, you never know. In the 1920s, a Canadian mechanic and inventor named Charles Pogue reportedly invented a carburetor that let cars get 200 miles per gallon. Then in the 70s and 80s, inventor Tom Ogle claimed he had a system that vaporized fuel so efficiently his car got about 100 miles per gallon. These were huge breakthroughs. Imagine slashing fuel costs and emissions overnight. But both men ran into problems. Ogle got offers from investors, but then things got weird. Ogle's system was never mass-produced. People around him said he was being pressured to sell or shut up. And then in 1981, at just 26 years old, Ogle died suddenly from what was ruled an overdose. But people close to him, they weren't buying that. And Pogue's original designs also kind of disappeared. Clearly these guys were onto something, so the way both stories just kind of stop out of nowhere definitely makes you wonder. Joshua Silver, a physicist from the UK, invented a really clever pair of glasses that let wearers adjust the focus themselves. No more expensive visits to the optometrist or needing multiple pairs for reading and distance. Just twist a dial and there you go, crystal clear vision for everyone. This could have been a game changer, especially in poorer parts of the world where there isn't much access to eye care. You'd think companies would be all over something like this, but no. The glasses were a hit in tests and charity programs, but they never really made it into stores. Why is that? Well, the story goes that big eyewear companies weren't into it. These glasses basically made them unnecessary. Again, no high-priced exams, no need for different lenses. Silver pushed for wider distribution, especially in developing countries, but that didn't really happen. Glasses are still out there in small programs and they actually work, but they never took off the way they should have. It's a super simple invention that could have helped millions of people see clearly and saved them hundreds of dollars, but instead it got quietly sidelined. In 1989, two chemists, Martin Fleischmann and Stanley Pons, claimed they'd pulled off cold fusion. Basically a way to create tons of clean energy at room temperature without needing a reactor or tons of fuel. If it was real, it could have changed the world. Cheap, endless power without pollution or radiation. But right after they announced it, things went south. Other labs tried to copy their experiment, and they couldn't get the same results. The scientific community turned on them. A lot of them called it junk science. The media also flipped, and soon cold fusion was being mocked everywhere. Their funding disappeared, and Pons and Fleischmann kind of faded from the spotlight, but not everyone thinks it was just a bad experiment. Some believe the whole thing got buried on purpose. After all, if you've got a breakthrough that could wipe out the need for oil, coal, and nuclear power, it's not exactly going to make energy companies happy. Today, most people think the whole thing was a flop, but there's still a small group of scientists working on this, convinced that there's something there. In the 80s, a British guy named Maurice Ward, who, fun fact, was actually a hairdresser, came up with a plastic that could take insane amounts of heat. He called it Starlight, and this stuff was pretty crazy. He showed it off on a BBC show called Tomorrow's World, where he coated a raw egg in it and blasted it with a blowtorch for 5 full minutes. When they cracked it open afterward, the egg was still raw on the inside. The shell was warm, but it was intact. You could hold it in your hand right after. NASA, the military, and a bunch of companies were very interested in this, because tests showed it could even protect against intense heat that kind of mimicked the energy of what you'd see in something like a nuclear blast. But Ward didn't want to sell the formula unless he stayed in control, and that wasn't going to fly. He was super secretive, and he never patented it. When he died in 2011, he took the full recipe with him. There are rumors that his family has some of the formula, but nothing's ever been confirmed. To this day, no one's recreated anything exactly like it. A strange heat-resistant material created by a British hairdresser could survive blasts that would melt steel, but its formula vanished when he died. Ancient swords that could slice through metal like it was paper were made with a secret steel recipe lost to time and still impossible to perfectly copy. And a type of concrete built 2,000 years ago can actually repair its own cracks. These are lost inventions scientists today can't recreate. Starlight was this weird, almost unbelievable material created by a British hairdresser named Maurice Ward during the 70s and 80s. Somehow he'd come up with a substance that could supposedly handle insane amounts of heat. Heat that would melt metal, vaporize plastic, and kill you instantly. But this Starlight material would hold up against it. This clip here is from BBC's Tomorrow's World, which aired in 1990. Here they blowtorch an egg coated in the material, and when they crack it open, the egg inside is still raw. This segment introduced a lot of people to this new form of plastic, which could supposedly withstand nuclear-level heat and space re-entry temperatures. Obviously, NASA and Boeing were interested. Even weapons labs wanted it. But Ward was paranoid about getting ripped off, so he never let anyone keep a sample. He let them test it, sure, but he kept the formula a secret. Supposedly, only a couple people in his family ever knew it. We still don't really know what it was made of. Oddly, one of his daughters claimed, though, that it was safe enough to eat and that they'd fed it to dogs and horses. I wonder how they found that out. Anyway, unfortunately, Maurice Ward died in 2011, so we may never know how this stuff was made. There was once a sword so sharp and strong it became legendary across the ancient world. They were called Damascus blades. These blades were incredible. They could slice through metal, and not only that, they were also gorgeous, with these swirling, water-like patterns in them. But by the 18th century, production just stopped. We have examples of these swords, but no one today can completely recreate the process. Blacksmiths and scientists have tried, and yeah, you can get close, but something's just missing. The steel actually came from India and Sri Lanka, where blacksmiths made something called Wootz steel. They melted iron in small sealed containers with special plant materials and let it cool super slowly. That slow cooling created tiny particles of carbon inside the metal. Some scientists think those particles formed little tube-like structures, basically carbon that organized itself in a way that made the steel way stronger than normal. The knowledge just kinda disappeared. Maybe the specific ore they used ran out, maybe the trade routes that delivered the right ingredients got cut off, but whatever happened, by the 1700s, it was gone. You can technically buy Damascus blades today, but they're not genuine Damascus steel. They just look really nice. And they probably cut pretty well. We all know the Pantheon and ancient Roman bridges have stood for over 2,000 years. Most modern concrete can fall apart in about 50 to 100 years, especially in harsher conditions, but clearly not ancient Roman concrete. Well, there's a trick. Romans mixed volcanic ash called pozzolana with quicklime and heated it before adding water. This creates bits of lime clasts, which are hard lumps that aren't normally in modern concrete. When cracks formed and water seeped in, those lime clasts dissolved a bit and sealed the crack by growing calcite crystals back in place. So basically it almost glues itself back together. Scientists from MIT tested this. They made the Roman mix, broke it, soaked it in water, and the cracks healed up in weeks. Modern concrete just crumbles apart. If you ever found yourself on fire back in ancient Greece, you always knew there was plenty of water to hop into. But there's one instance where not even water would save you. Greek fire. This was the Byzantine Empire's secret weapon. It was terrifying because it could burn on water. Perfect for naval battles, which there were a lot of. There's also evidence they had pressurized devices on ships that acted like early flamethrowers. The fire would shoot out in a stream. Not only would it continue to burn on water, but it also stuck to stuff. We still don't know exactly what it was made of. The exact formula seemed to be a secret. Probably only a handful of people knew it, and it was never written down in full. If it was, we have no record of it anyway. Historians think there was some kind of mix involving crude oil plus additives like sulfur, pitch, or quicklime. A few modern attempts have come close, but none can fully match what Greek fire supposedly did. In 132 CE, a Chinese inventor named Zhang Heng built something that could detect earthquakes long before anyone could feel them. It was called a seismoscope, and it worked so well that when one of its indicators went off, people thought it had malfunctioned until a messenger showed up days later confirming a quake had hit far away. This was basically a big bronze vessel surrounded by 8 dragon heads, each holding a metal ball. Below each one was a toad with its mouth open. When a distant earthquake hit, one of the balls would drop, pointing to the direction the quake came from. Nobody really knows how it worked. Some scientists think there was a pendulum inside that shook when the ground moved and somehow set off the ball drop, but nobody really knows for sure. The original device is long gone, and there's no blueprint or clear instructions on how it was built. People have tried to rebuild it using different mechanisms. Some get the ball drop system to work, but none of them function quite like the records say the original did. What makes this so amazing is that it was reportedly able to detect quakes hundreds of miles away without modern sensors. For something built nearly 2,000 years ago, that's insane. The Lycurgus cup is this glass goblet from the 4th century that looks green when you shine light in front of it, but stick a light behind it and it turns deep red. Why? Because it's loaded with tiny gold and silver particles, so tiny they're measured in nanometers, roughly 1,000 times smaller than a grain of salt. The gold makes it glow red when the light passes through, and the silver reflects green when light bounces off it. That's how the colors flip depending on where the light's coming from. Scientists finally figured this out about 60 years ago. They used electron microscopes to spot the microscopic metal blobs in the glass. People have tried to recreate this. There's some experimental 3D printed stuff going on, but we still don't know exactly how the Romans nailed it so perfectly all those years ago. Somehow ancient glassmakers made this thing, maybe without knowing any of the science behind it. There's a theory that they accidentally created this thing, which would be pretty interesting. Everyone knows a Stradivarius violin sounds amazing, but even today no one can fully explain why. Antonio Stradivari built these legendary instruments in Italy during the late 1600s and early 1700s. About 650 are still around, each are worth millions. Scientists have studied the wood, the varnish, and the structure using everything from CT scans to chemical tests. Some think the secret is the density of the wood itself. It grew during a mini ice age. Trees grow slower when it's cold, and that makes the wood rings tighter and more uniform. That kind of wood vibrates differently. It carries sound better and more evenly across the body of the instrument, which of course helps produce that clean, warm tone these violins are known for. The varnish is another mystery. Stradivari used some kind of mix involving tree resin, oil, maybe even borax to stop bugs. Whatever it was though, it soaked into the wood just the right amount without killing the sound. People have tried to recreate it, but no one can get it exactly right. Even tiny differences in how thick the varnish was or how long it cured could change the way the violin sounds. So yeah, modern makers can get close, but something in Stradivari's process, maybe the wood, maybe the varnish, maybe both, is still a mystery. King Tutankhamun's dagger is literally alien. The dagger is made from nickel-rich meteorite iron that was smithed into a razor-sharp blade around 1330 BCE. Scientists confirmed this by analyzing the metal. They found about 11% nickel, way above what's normal, for Earth rock, that is. Now, Egypt was still in the Bronze Age. Iron smelting wasn't a thing yet, so they likely hammered a chunk of meteorite into shape. It's possible they heated it a bit to soften it, but definitely nothing like modern forging. Today, we can analyze it, scan it, and tell you where the meteor came from, but we still don't know exactly how they worked with it, how they shaped it so precisely, and how it came out looking as good as it does. Now for one of the weirdest ones on the list, flexible glass, or vitrum flexile. So a story from the reign of Emperor Tiberius in the 1st century says that an inventor brought Tiberius a bowl made of glass. It wouldn't shatter when it dropped, it just dented, and the guy could also hammer it back into shape. Tiberius asked if anyone else knew how to make it. The inventor said no, it was his secret, so Tiberius had him killed. Why? Well, supposedly the emperor didn't want the secret getting out because it might devalue gold and silver. No one's ever found an actual piece, so there's a good chance this is just a myth, but some researchers think it might have been real. Still, we've never found archaeological proof of this. The only evidence is in stories. But if it was real, it would mean that Roman glassmakers invented shock-proof glass centuries before it was a thing. And we may never know exactly how. Alright, this one's wild. Tesla basically wanted to invent a peace weapon that would end all wars. Around 1934, he started talking publicly about something he called the Teleforce device, later nicknamed the Death Ray. The idea was pump super high energy through a beam of particles so powerful it could bring down armies or planes from hundreds of miles away. He claimed he could stop an entire fleet of enemy aircraft at 250 miles, and that countries with it would be virtually untouchable. He tried to get funding from the US, Britain even offered it to the League of Nations. The Soviets apparently kicked in $25,000, but nobody ever saw a functioning model. After Tesla died, a bunch of his papers went missing, so there's a chance there was blueprints of this that have just been lost forever or hidden away somewhere.